recently did a video on the recent The Batman, and naturally it made me want to go back and revisit the Christopher Nolan trilogy. And I wanted to kind of mount a defense of The Dark Knight Rises, which I think is kind of unfairly maligned, or considered to be far worse than the other films in the franchise. So this is the third film coming after The Dark Knight, and obviously Christopher Nolan and his crew had the unenviable task of following up what is still considered to be one of the best superhero movies ever made. And that's even considering all the Marvel movies made after the fact. I still don't think they've really topped this one. Black Panther comes closest, in my opinion. So this is a movie where they tried to compress many different storylines, and they also had to deal with the loss of Heath Ledger, the Joker character, who couldn't be in this one, as was originally planned, I believe. So instead, they went with the Bane character. I know Warner Brothers really wanted Nolan to do a Riddler film, probably do a very simple pared-to-back film, similar to, something like The Long Halloween or Hush. And I think Chris Nolan really didn't want to do that. It probably would have been something kind of similar to what we got in The Batman. So, it wasn't such a bad idea, but I think his heart probably wasn't into it. And we should also consider that, nothing was forcing Chris Nolan to come back. He had pretty much said everything he had wanted to say about the Batman character and the mythos, I think, in the previous two films. So this one really focuses in more on the secondary and tertiary characters and Gotham as a whole and what it represents and why people might want to keep destroying it and what's at stake with trying to rescue it so many times. So obviously, many things can be leveled at this film in the form of critiques. Bane has been widely mocked and parodied and memed over the years, as has, the Batman raspy voice. I will say, having watched it a little more closely this time, you can actually see that Bale makes, really conscious decisions and choices of when he deploys, the full swear to me, basically, voice, and when he has more of like a normal, Batman talking to his allies voice, or even talking as Bruce Wayne in the Batman costume, or sometimes he'll talk as Batman in the Bruce Wayne guise. So, there is a lot of variation to his characterization. So you can see that this movie most directly references comic book arcs such as Nightfall, what's it called? Dead Man's Land or something like that. No Man's Land. The year-long story arc where a earthquake has basically destroyed Gotham and the government has washed its hand of it. And even The Dark Knight Returns. You can see several moments in the film that are directly pulled from that book, including, sort of the way that the Batman returns in this film, as well as just the general idea of, a younger, more powerful antagonist force. The mutants in that book, in this one, the League of Shadows, or the Bane's Followers, whatever they're called. So you can see there's definitely resonances in The Dark Knight Returns and in Nightfall. He fights, this younger, tougher opponent and is beaten and actually has his back broken in both the comic and the movie. And then he eventually, pulls himself back together, trains more, somehow finds his spirit again, and actually is able to defeat this opponent. So I will say that they also probably pulled from, the Occupy movement and various social movements, the Arab Spring that were happening around the world at the time. So trying to get weird and polemical with some things that they didn't necessarily have to do for this film. You can also compare it, I suppose, to, he really wanted to draw references to A Tale of Two Cities. Again, I'm not quite sure why. But, creators also get bored sometimes, particularly when they're making the third film in a franchise. So it's very natural to want to try to bring in new sources, try to adapt some different material that's not necessarily directly from the comics. He's obviously trying to draw a parallel between the events of this film and A Tale of Two Cities and maybe other types of Dickensian fiction. Just going off of Bane, this is a great intro to the character. Again, he had huge shoes to fill with Heath Ledger, who won who won an Oscar after his death, posthumously. And while he can't quite reach that level, I do think he makes a really imposing figure. I think he definitely made a choice with the voice that's very memorable. And it's one of the best jokes on the Harley Quinn cartoon. He's obviously a very imposing figure. If you're familiar with what Thomas Hardy looks like regularly, he obviously put on a ton of muscle and mass just to make himself, bulked out. They did obviously also make changes from the comic book character. This one isn't supposed to be running on venom or steroids or anything like that. He's just like that strong naturally, or through lots of working out. Um, and it's more like he has a mask that is controlling his pain from having been, ripped to shreds in this weird pit prison that the League of Shadows controls, or maybe their opponents. I'm not quite sure. Um, so yeah, I think Thomas Hardy did actually do a really good performance. I think the biggest disservice to his character is, the reveal in like the last 10 minutes of the plot. That it's actually Talia al Ghul, this Miranda Tate character. And by the way, this movie has an obsession with names and kind of occluding identities, which makes sense, given that that's what Batman does. Uh, but it's a little too cute, between Miranda Tate actually being Talia al Ghul, and then, Officer Blake revealed to be Robin, which is really strange. I'm not sure how familiar the writers or everyone was with the different Robin characters, but there's never been a Robin called Blake, and I think it would have been a lot more clever reveal if at the end the person had said, "Oh, you should go by your real name, Dick Grayson, or Richard, or whatever." I think audiences would be smart enough to put that together rather than having him be called Robin, which again has never been a thing in any of the comics. Some negatives. I really think Anne Hathaway, we kind of gave her performance a pass at the time, comparing her to Michelle Pfeiffer or, Julie Newmar and some of the 60s versions of the character. But honestly, her performance isn't that great. She's kind of doing a very by-the-numbers Anne Hathaway performance. There's nothing that memorable about her. Her costume is, she looks good in the costume, obviously, but aside from that, there isn't really much to this characterization. She's just kind of a tough one-note badass, comparing it to the Zoe Kravitz character, who's, a lot more similar to the comics and, creates even more of a believable human character. I think she doesn't really come off that well by comparison, or even to Michelle Pfeiffer, who did a really excellent job as well. So yeah, I think her character's a little bit rote and, again, one note. We're obviously doing the whole storyline that, she's morally ambiguous, goes back and forth between hero and villain a few different times, eventually revealing herself to be heroic. And also, they've done this in the comics a few times, but I don't really quite buy her and Batman as a couple. I don't see much chemistry between her and Christian Bale. And just the idea that they would, go off together and live together and basically be married feels very like whatever the equivalent of Elseworlds is for DC. It doesn't quite resonate as realistic. Another bad thing, and this is because Michael Caine's performance is so great and memorable. He basically is only in the first third of the film, then departs for most of it, only to return, briefly at the end, which is a big disservice to both the character and the actor. It's fortunate because, again, I think he's one of the best versions of Alfred we've seen. Andy Serkis has done some good work in that role as well as the original Tim Burton actor from the Hammer films. So that's also a disappointment, is that he's not in the film more. I think Gary Oldman actually does a really good job as Commissioner Gordon in this one. We see him kind of dealing with the ramifications directly of the lie that was told at the end of The Dark Knight regarding Harvey Dent. Some people might also wonder, why they didn't make this the Two-Face film, really go all in on Two-Face for this one. But if you actually go back to The Long Halloween, which was largely the basis for The Dark Knight, you'll see that, between when he gets his face splashed with acid, becoming Two-Face entirely, and the end of the book, there really isn't that much Two-Face in it. So actually, what Christopher Nolan did with The Dark Knight is, pretty much how it goes in the comic. There really isn't that much Two-Face. There's more in Dark Victory, but I don't think that book is very good. They could have also maybe drawn from Hush, but I think that would have been, very repetitive compared to The Dark Knight. Again, I don't think they were interested in recasting the Joker. Although, ironically, I think Joseph Gordon-Levitt would have done a really good performance as the Joker, trying to honor Heath Ledger. But they didn't go that way. We do get a brief snippet with Cillian Murphy as the Scarecrow, so it's kind of nice to see him come back. I do think a lot of people criticize, and I might be critical as well, of the third act. It's just where all the elements come to the forefront. We're getting far beyond, these realistic trappings. And it's kind of a trap that Christopher Nolan set for himself, right? He was so obsessed with presenting this as realistic, and this could be happening in our world. So then by the end, where the lunatics are running the asylum, and by the way, I don't know why they didn't actually set most of that in Arkham Asylum. That would have been a really cool reference to many different arcs in the TV show and in the comics. To actually have it be set in Arkham instead of some weird, I don't know, courthouse. I'm not sure what that all is. But it's very like Alice in Wonderland, completely unrealistic, piles of desks and people getting executed by walking across frozen water. And I will also say that I'm not as big a fan of Pittsburgh representing Gotham City as I was of Chicago. Chicago made it look very sleek and modern, and the Pittsburgh stuff makes it look, they obviously set it there for the snow and the cold, and it comes off, very cold and depressing, which I guess was the intent, but, it's not that fun a location to have to spend most of the movie in. Some other ridiculous elements, once the police hear wind of Bane and his forces and where they're hiding, they send literally every cop in the city down to confront him, which makes absolutely no sense from any tactical standpoint. It would make a lot more sense if they surrounded all the different sewer exits and then sent in some tactical teams to flush people out. So, it's obviously just contrivance to get them off the table as far as a chessboard for the majority of the film. I will also criticize a lot of the dialogue. This is a lot of the problems that were also in Batman Begins, and I very much suspect David S. Goyer as the main reason that this happened. But, a lot of the dialogue is very clunky exposition, people saying oh yeah, the blank slate, the program used to erase your identity from all criminal databases, stuff like that, where they just talk in very unrealistic ways to convey some, very turgid exposition that they probably could have found a different way to convey. So that stuff's not good. Any of those lines that are really clunkily, obviously exposition. Oh yeah, Bane, the masked wanderer who takes over different areas or something like that. I don't know, just really ridiculous sounding clunky dialogue. So again, I think Christian Bale did a really good job. They're obviously going with this metaphor of rising. I think the most powerful sequence in the entire film is the titular Dark Knight Rises. It's after Bruce has had his back broken. He's been placed in this pit. All the prisoners are telling him that he has to find his spirit, find a way to climb out. You can see this very much as a spiritual or religious metaphor of, rising up above, transcending, this kind of transformation, becoming the Batman again, essentially. Because he kind of did it half-heartedly at the beginning to reemerge as the Batman. But this is him really finding his, juge de vivre, or whatever it's called. So I think that was the most impressive sequence, the best the music in the whole movie. And again, I think Hans Zimmer, any one of these creators could have very easily, sat on their laurels and just kind of repeated what they'd done previously. And I think it's impressive that Hans Zimmer and other members of the production team, were able to really elevate their game. The effects are still really crisp, even though this movie is pretty old at this point. None of the effects really stand out as completely fake looking or anything like that. So I think obviously Christopher Nolan puts a big emphasis on practical effects, having real tumblers going down the street, real explosions, stuff like that. I'm not that big a fan of the design of the Bat, the flying vehicle that the Batman uses at points in this film. Looks kind of stupid in my opinion. Looks more like a beetle or something. I don't know. I'm not really sure why they went with that design. Obviously, they were trying to veer away from the more obvious Tim Burton looks like a bat thing. And maybe they were trying to make it look more like it's powered by drones or a helicopter or something. But I doubt many toys were sold of this vehicle. Looks pretty dumb. But again, you wouldn't tell that from the effects. It's very well comped. I'm not sure whether it's a CGI vehicle or whether it's a practical model that they superimposed, but it does lead to some pretty exciting action sequences towards the end. Again, with the Talia al Ghul reveal, obviously they were trying to replicate what they had done in Batman Begins with Ra's al Ghul, but that reveal comes, about 30 to 40 minutes before the end of the movie, so you have a long time to sit with him as the villain. Whereas in this one, we immediately are undercutting Bane by saying, oh, actually, he's just another underling. And then we barely get any time with the Talia al Ghul character, who's not just Miranda Tate pretending to be some nice socialite. Um, so it kind of feels like a waste. I think there was something going on behind the scenes where the actress was pregnant and maybe wasn't as available as she could have been. So I'm not quite sure what happened there, but it's kind of a whiff to introduce that character but not really do that much with her. In the comic books, obviously she's a really important character. Various different storylines involving Ra's al Ghul that culminate with like Son of the Demon, stuff like that. Um, and I also find it odd that it seemed like a lot of comic book writers and obviously movie and TV writers at the time were really dead set on turning Talia into a villainous character. And some, sycophant to her father, which is true to the comics, but often she is more of a sympathetic character, almost, being controlled or abused emotionally by her father. Whereas in this one, she's obviously just pretty much a villain once she reveals her true colors, who just wants to nuke a city for some reason. Doesn't really feel that realistic or plausible to me. I also think maybe the pacing of this movie is a little odd. It's almost a 3-hour movie, which would have been a lot to sit through in the theaters. So we have the great opening act. We have a little reintroduction into the city and the various players in the city. We have a few, they're trying to set up a mystery, like we don't know what's going on. Like Catwoman steals some pearls, steals Bruce Wayne's fingerprints, steals I think they steal some of his data from the Wall Street break-in, which again also feels like a weird Occupy reference. I don't know. Again, it felt kind of unnecessary. But obviously that's also like a Dark Knight Returns reference, that whole sequence. Another criticism, a lot of people have said this, but we don't really get a lot of Batman action, and a lot of the choreography is a little bit undercooked. A lot of people have pointed out you can see entire sequences where it looks like the Batman or Catwoman aren't really hitting anyone. They're just like punching the air, and then the stunned person is like flying backwards. So I feel like they could have taken a few more takes. It definitely feels like this movie was rushed or compressed in terms of production. And I kind of blame Warner Brothers for that, probably. Or maybe Christopher Nolan. Again, this kind of reminds me of either the Hobbit films, where Peter Jackson didn't really want to come back and everything was kind of rushed, or I compare it a lot in my mind to Spectre, which I think is one, aside from Quantum of Solace, I think is the worst Daniel Craig era Bond film, where a lot of ludicrous things happen, and they're kind of just like, doing the same thing they had done in the previous one, but not as well. So I compare it to that. I don't think it's quite as bad an execution as that one. It is nice, again, to spend time with these characters. Lucius Fox is a great character. Most of the new characters are pretty good. I will also say it is strange that we have, I think, a congressman character in here, and the actor also is in Joker playing Thomas Wayne. I'm not really sure why that was done, but it's pretty odd, going between both films to see the same actor playing different roles. And such important roles in both. We get some very nice, greasy mobster characters. Some actors who would go on to be much bigger, particularly in the MCU. This shows again Christopher Nolan's eye for talent, or whoever the casting director was, to get some of these people in here before they really broke through entirely. We have the character of Roland Daggett. Again, I don't think that much good stuff is done with him. He's basically just like a creepy slime ball, and then he gets unceremoniously executed. So that's another kind of waste, but we're just kind of doing the thing about like the freaks are taking over Gotham again that we did in The Dark Knight. I think the main problem with this film is there's a lot of mixed themes that it's not that clear, what the real focus should be on, and that kind of always makes a film feel weaker if you're not really clear on what it's about. I think they mixed in too many storylines. I would have ditched all the Occupy stuff and just focused it on, villains trying to take over Gotham. You could have just had the same prison breakout stuff. Again, some of the stuff with I don't know why, but whenever I see the scene where Bane reads Commissioner Gordon's letter, it feels like a child wrote the letter. It feels very strange and doesn't feel like Gordon would have written a letter that sounded like that. It's just like, Harvey Dent is a bad man, and I'm glad that he died, or something like that. I don't know. He tried to kill my child. I don't know. It's really stupid sounding to me. Um, but yeah, we're just doing the same thing that we see in Nightfall and we see in The Dark Knight Returns, where we're trying to attack the symbols of virtue. Um, so again, we have some good stuff. The movie looks great again. IMAX for various scenes. Um, I think the villain is pretty compelling until he's not, which is unfortunate. I liked the idea of including Catwoman, though again, I don't think she's done that well in retrospect compared to Zoe Kravitz's portrayal, or maybe even like the animated series or how she's portrayed in the comics. This is a very like one note, not that impressive performance. The music I think is still good. The effects hold up. There's a lot of really good, entertaining set pieces. I mean, I think that's another complaint that people have is maybe the action isn't very strong. I think action maybe isn't Christopher Nolan's strong suit. He obviously relies on lots on Call of Duty-esque paramilitary type scenes of just people kind of chaos, people wandering around, guns blazing. You can see that in Tenet as well. So yeah, he has a very particular I don't know, inability with action, or like very specific way he does action that he might have gotten somebody else, like a second unit or somebody else, to switch things up for this one. The Bats design I hate, but I don't mind how it's used. Kind of mixed feelings about how they use Chicago and Pittsburgh to represent Gotham. I really would have loved, I mean, they kind of hinted at Harvey Bullock and Renee Montoya in The Dark Knight. They have character stand-ins that aren't really those characters, but are basically those characters. I would have loved to see them come back, or like more cop characters that we could latch onto. Joseph Gordon-Levitt is working really hard to play both a good cop, and eventually he's basically going to be Nightwing or something like that, or Batman Beyond. I don't know what the idea is there, or just another Batman. Eventually Dick Grayson does become Batman in the comics briefly. When Bruce Wayne's supposed to be dead. I think this is vastly underrated compared to every superhero film ever made. I'd still rank it above, a lot of the Marvel films and most of the DCEU films. It doesn't obviously reach nearly as high the level as The Dark Knight, but it really felt like Christopher Nolan put all his eggs, so to speak, into The Dark Knight, and then was kind of surprised that they wanted to follow up. Obviously when you make a movie that makes like $1 billion plus, you're going to want to make a sequel. And I think this movie was pretty successful. I think the Aurora shooting in Colorado kind of did chill the performance of it a little bit, but it obviously did still pretty well. This is definitely a Christopher Nolan film. It might not be his best one, and it's hardly his worst one. There are worse Christopher Nolan films. Like Insomnia. Not a big fan of that one. It might have been nicer to just take like a simpler view to things and just made a kind of a more straightforward story, rather than try to do so many big, epic, climactic, war-based, cataclysm-based stories. But he went with what he went with, and we just had to deal with what that is, not try to write another movie in our mind. The fight between Batman and Bane is very well done. Kind of dark and dread-filled. So that's all I basically had to say about the movie. But give this one another try. Seriously, especially if you we all probably had kind of crappier TVs back when this movie was released on home video. Now we might have slightly more advanced displays. So this movie looks pretty good still. Watch it in chunks if that helps. I think it has more good in it than it has bad. I think the main things that fail it are maybe from a script writing avenue, where again I don't think it seems to me like Jonathan Nolan wasn't quite as involved with the writing, or maybe he just wrote the Bane sequences, and it seemed like David S. Goyer got a lot of his weird technobabble exposition clunky dialogue in there that again kind of drags it down. But again, it's not it's better than Batman Begins. I still say that, and it's still better than most of the other Batman movies, certainly the Affleck movies. Oh, one other criticism I should mention is that it does seem like the Batman ends up killing a lot of people in this one. You know, he has a body count that's almost as big as Ben Affleck's in Batman v Superman. It's just kind of done, you know, very bloodlessly. You know, he shoots guns at some trucks and somehow it crashes because he killed a guy. So yeah, some of that stuff is a little weird given the heavy focus on, you know, he even says in this one, no guns, and the heavy focus on supposedly his one rule of not killing people, but I guess it's more like a war scenario, so his rules are a little bit loose. So yeah, I think this is a pretty good follow-up. I think obviously it could have been a lot better. They could have gone a lot of different ways. I'm not sure why they don't just let Zack Snyder or Chris Nolan literally adapt The Dark Knight Returns, because that would be really good if they literally just did that storyline straight, instead of, you know, taking bits and pieces for this and the Joker and Batman v Superman, and you just end up with some bland messes instead of you know, one really good storyline that everybody loves. They even have the animated version, so we see that it can work. It's very strange to me that they don't just do that. They seem to be waiting or saving it for something. I'm not sure what. Maybe better effects. I'm not sure. It's very strange. It might also have to do with the Frank Miller backlash, even though obviously Sin City was very well received, as was 300 and various other of his adaptations, or even, you know, not Alan Moore's Watchmen was fairly well received in retrospect. So yeah, I would love for them to literally just adapt that storyline, you know, beginning to end, you know, Carrie Kelly, Robin, all that stuff, old Joker, old Two-Face. You know, it's a really compelling book, and it would be a really compelling movie, and they should just adapt that instead of kind of trying to piecemeal it. So hopefully Warner Brothers wises up and just does that one day. Maybe bring Zack Snyder back to direct that. I don't know. That'd be pretty cool. So yeah, that's my 2 cents. I still think this is definitely better than all the Zack Snyder stuff with Batman. It's not as good as The Batman or The Dark Knight, and it's obviously leagues better than the 80s and 90s versions. Okay, so check it out again if you haven't seen it for a while. I think it's better than you might expect.